Okay, so this format is like relaxed, um,
Although it's being recorded.
although it's
There's
being
that.
recorded, right? Yes. Um, and the rough idea is, there was a bunch of sort of like questions that might stimulate you that I got sent out in that email. You can respond to them one by one, or you pick out things, or you tell a story that you think kind of ticks all the boxes, or whatever it is, because everybody's seen you on the TCDC thing already. And
Okay.
then somewhere halfway through, you can stop and say, all right, other questions? And maybe people will have specific things to ask about this area or their own lives or whatever.
Okay. Hmm. Let's
So
see.
ready, jump right in when you're ready.
Sure. Well, hello everyone again, and my name is Leah. So I am first appreciative of you making time. I know everybody's schedule is quite busy, so I appreciate that, and look forward to learning more about you. So I guess I have the privilege of doing a little soul bearing. My end. Um, so I'll do a deeper dive into my background. So I am, born and raised here in the Southern Tier, in Binghamton on the south side of Binghamton, and come from a blue collar family. Both of my parents were very involved with their unions. My mom actually worked for Endicott Johnson's. My father worked for Binghamton University until he retired. And, very, very, very early on, and I come from a large family. And so, grew up on the south side of Binghamton, but actually in public housing. So I lived in public housing more than half of my life, like I'd say like a quarter of my life, excuse me. And so definitely experiences around I didn't know what poverty was, but I just knew we didn't have money like that. So and the way kind of poverty looks now, and just thinking about this, especially in the work that I have done in public service over the years, and really doing work specifically around addressing poverty. My family, we didn't know we were poor. We just knew that there were resources to help when we fell short financially. And so, that most certainly framed my worldview, most certainly. And also a lot of the values that my parents instilled in me and my siblings. Because again, my parents were very involved in their unions, but also in the community, like where we lived, in the housing projects, and then, of course, in like the larger community. And so, having that early exposure to doing community work, because also my parents were very involved um, with our church. And so I got the chance to like be out and learn and connect and kind of see those values in real time. Parents always most certainly um instilled in me and my siblings, again, those values of being my brother and sister's keeper, but also this idea of you just don't follow the crowd, right? It's important to understand how systems work, how organizations function. Actually, one of their uh, mantras, like, we're raising lions, not sheep. So they had a real big thing about that, but also education, top priority. And so neither one of my parents are college educated. And so I was the first person in my family to go to college and actually graduate. So I'm a first gen college graduate. And, just growing up and being involved in the community, I started doing more formally community organizing at the age of 15. I just didn't know it was called community organizing until I went to college. And so, for me, I always had this passion for community service and science because I actually wanted to be a pediatric neurosurgeon. And so I thought as a kid that all you needed was like Vaseline and Band-Aids and maybe some ginger ale, and that just solved everything. So for me, I was always, I don't want to say torn, but I vacillated between like my passion for science and also for community service. And so when I got my degree in neuroscience, and at that time when I graduated, my mother had gotten like really sick. And so I ended up at the time when I was right before I graduated, I had been working as an intern at a local nonprofit, learning about ways to connect families with public health insurance, such as Medicaid and Child Health Plus, and Family Health Plus. And so when I graduated, and also at the same time, my mother became very ill, and my internship turned into a employment opportunity, and I thought I hit it big because the ongoing kind of fear that we had as college students was like, okay, you have this degree, but then how are you going to be able to survive financially because the difficulties with finding work? And so I was lucky enough to work at this nonprofit, and I thought I hit it big because I had health insurance. I had a 401k. I didn't quite know what it meant, but I knew it was important to have one, to have an employer that offered you one. And of course, health insurance. And I was making more than minimum wage at that time. So I thought, hey, I'm doing all right. But again, I was young and didn't understand just even the fact making a couple of dollars above minimum wage definitely was not enough to support myself. And so um, I connected once I started working formally for this local nonprofit. There was an organizer that came to our job from Citizen Action, and this was during the organization I work for. So an organizer from Citizen Action came and was talking about at that time the Take Back America campaign, and they were looking for volunteers to get involved. And I'd always been politically aware because of my parents, and so I went and volunteered and did a phone bank. And the phone bank captain at that time was like, Leah, you have a lot of great potential. You're great on the phones. Why don't you come back and we'll have you become a phone bank captain? And I was just like, had no idea what that meant. But again, I wanted to have an impact. So I was like, sure. So from that point on, my experience or my chops as a community organizer got stronger. And so I went from being a phone bank captain, a volunteer, then a phone bank captain, to being a full-fledged professional community organizer working on issues such as education reform here in New York, healthcare. So did a lot of advocacy, pushing for healthcare reform, specifically working on the passage of the Affordable Care Act. But a lot of us were, and I still am, in favor of universal health care. So that's how I, cut my proverbial teeth in organizing. And I worked as an organizer at Citizen Action also on environmental justice issues and so on. And at the time, again, I had just graduated from college. And at the time I was doing organizing, I helped to coordinate a citywide issue program called the Neighborhood Assemblies, where we reached out to different communities across the city of Binghamton with the purpose of getting residents more involved in city government. And so I was doing that, and I was approached by different folks in the community to run for office. Now, I had never in my 5-year, 10-year plan had it on my menu to run for office. So for me, I was totally comfortable with working behind the scenes on other candidates' campaigns at the local, state, and federal level. I worked on like the late Congressman Maurice Henchy's campaign, the Attorney General, like all these different campaigns. And so at the time, City Council in Binghamton was viewed in a very negative way. The meetings were public, but people thought they were a reality TV show because of the discourse that would happen during council meetings. The meetings would go on, and there was a lot of unprofessional behavior. And so at the time, the representative for my soon-to-be council district, I had been working as an organizer in. So the long and short of that, I was encouraged by people in the community, folks I've been working with. They're like, really think you should run. And at the time I was only 26. And I was like, I'm too young. I don't, there weren't many women, if maybe less than a handful of women in elected office within the county, let alone any young people or any people of color. And also the financial stresses that come with running for office. I was like, well, I don't, my family, we don't have money. So, and I knew that running for office costs money. And so I had all of these kind of, check boxes of why now wasn't the time I needed to wait. And so I ended up, having a discussion with my family, which is a core of all of my decisions that I make. And so, of course, with community support, I ran for office. Now, I ran against the city council president. So my entree into elected office was definitely a trial by fire. And so I ran against the city council president. And as you all know, we have fusion voting here in New York. So I ran, I had to do a primary against him, but then he had also formed an independent party and I had to run against him again in the general election. So I said, well, if we're going to do this, I want to make sure that the community feels like, and not just feels, but actively has input. So I organized all across my district. I created what I call like block captains. And these were folks that not only were helping me to connect with other neighbors, but these folks ended up becoming my advisors during my time on city council. And so spent a lot of time doing voter registration. And so we had an amazing turnout. So typically in a city council election, you would maybe have an 8% voter turnout. We had a 24% voter turnout. And it is because we had an amazing ground game, and even more so because people saw themselves in the campaign. So I intentionally made sure that we were diverse in every sense of the word, not just simply in terms of like phenotypic expression, but again, socioeconomic backgrounds, again, because I wanted my campaign to reflect the community. So that was my first entree at the ripe young age of 26, 27, and I served 2 terms. And so, so when my term was over, because we have term limits, and even prior to that, I had always been doing things behind the scenes. And so I've always been a big champion of getting folks into the political pipeline, because I understood during my time on council, when decisions were being made, oftentimes the folks who were impacted were not in the room. And so I felt it was my responsibility to kind of help to break through those barriers that happen. And so I spent time connected with an organization called Vote Run Lead. And so it's a nonprofit that trains women all over the country to run for office at various levels. I also, with other progressive elected officials, I was a founding board member of the organization Local Progress, which supports local elected officials, progressive local elected officials during their time in office with passing progressive policies. And so again, doing things behind the scenes, always intentionally collaborating and trying to break through and make new pathways for folks. So that fast forwards me to why I am running. So, oh, Emily, you had your hand up.
I was just going to say, is that where you met Dominique?
Yeah, so me and, oh gosh, so we go,
yes,
yes, I know. So Dominic and I, we actually met before I even ran for office. So during my time as an organizer of Citizen Action, I met Dominic doing environmental justice work. And so that's how we met.
You mean Frangillo, as in Frangillo?
Yes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. So we met because I was doing a lot of work on environmental justice issues, such as like green jobs and also looking at programs around weatherization. So that's how me and Dominic met. And then when I ran for office, we connected through Young Elected Officials Network. And so that was also at the same time when I ran for city council, I also met Savante. So we actually ran for city council together. So, and then also I met Nathan Shinagawa at the same time. So we all like essentially came into politics, you know, we were babies, but we came into politics at the same time. And so we forged an even stronger connection through the Young Elected Officials Network that we're all alum of. So yes, so again, connections, collaborations, that is like the core of who I am. And so I'm always, when I'm in these spaces, I'm always asking who's in the room, who's not in the room, what can I do that's within my power to empower others, also make connections. Like I'm always making connections, whether it's for folks for like personal reasons or even for professional. You can talk to anybody, they'll tell you that I'm the secret connector. Anyway, so essentially, when my time was up with city council, but during my time on council, I did a lot of work building coalitions with local elected officials, not just simply within Binghamton, but across the region. Did a lot of work with state leaders as well, and did a lot of work passing equity-based legislation on things such as affordable, you know, housing, equal pay for women. I even led an effort during the time we had the mortgage housing crisis with the banks. And so a number of residents, not just simply in Binghamton, but across the state, were highly impacted by predatory lending practices. And so one of the many things I'm proud of was that I worked with an organization called New York Communities for Change. And I helped push our city to actually divest funds from Chase Bank because of their bad practices when it came to mortgages. And so I didn't realize that the work that we did in Binghamton helped to set the stage for other cities in upstate New York to also do the same thing with divesting funds. And so it's those kinds of activities and actions that, you know, inspired me, but also motivated other folks to demonstrate that, yes, if you have folks in office who not only get the challenges, but actively work, and not by themselves, but build those coalitions, it can most certainly make a difference, which brings me to the present moment. So I currently work as an educator at Binghamton University in the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And so I work within the campus, but also with community partners on implementing DEI practices and education. And most certainly with this particular election, it is important. Also, I would say this time, one of the things that again, as I said, I'm always asking questions around like who's in the room, who's being intentionally left out of the room, is that I've noticed that a lot of the decisions that some of our electeds make are made not in the best interest of working families. And in fact, the policies add more harm rather than actually addressing these issues. And so I think our area most certainly deserves to have leadership that understands not only the challenges that working families are dealing with, but also is committed to pushing for those changes. Most certainly, even in my own family, you know, I help to take care of my mother, who is she has multiple health issues and aging, and so I understand firsthand the importance and need for healthcare, universal healthcare, especially challenges when it comes to medical debt. So when you have complications and you're on a fixed income, you know, those out-of-pocket costs are not something you can just snap your fingers and say, yes, let me pay this $200, you know, copay for an x-ray, right? We don't have it like that. And so, but those things build up. And so it's important that you have leaders that understand those struggles. Just to name, just in terms of lifting up healthcare specifically. But for me, and again, I'm tying in some of the questions that were shared. I also think that for our area, we also need leadership that understands these challenges and actually has experience in working on them. So although I'm in the city of Binghamton, I also did a lot of work with rural communities. So one of the big challenges that I worked on during my time on council was around food access, healthy food access, because my district in Binghamton, when I was on council, had the highest childhood obesity rate and also some of the highest poverty rates. And so the city of Binghamton as a whole, child poverty rate under children age 18 is double the state average. So did a lot of work through like establishing community gardens and urban farms, also working with local producers on initiatives such as like farm to table, with getting, again, supporting our local producers. I also helped to organize a farmers market, in my district, because of, again, looking at different ways for residents to get access to those important resources such as food. So that is, I was trying to make sure I weaved in all the different questions. So hopefully I touched on most of them. Okay, I wanted to make sure. So again, for me, having this opportunity to represent our area is very important. And it's not even about me. I look at myself as a conduit for our community members to have access that they deserve to resources from birth. And I understand the power that legislators have in making sure that that happens, and not just for us in the present, but also in the future. So that's essentially a little bit about me, and also why I am running.
Thank you so much. That was really great. We're sending money, by the way.
Well, thank you.
It's on its way. I just wanted to actually pick up on a quick question. Just before you started talking about elder care, which is one that I'm really kind of like, I also am taking care of both my parents. I wanted to ask you specifically, you kind of piqued my interest. You said something that current officials who are elected sometimes pass laws that make it more difficult for working families. Can you give me a couple of examples in your district of a couple of those that have been?
I'm like, do we got time?
Yeah.
So
no, but
I'll give a yes. So when I was on city council, one of the things that I worked on was we established a human rights commission. Mm-hmm. And so residents were coming to us sharing, especially historically marginalized residents, sharing experiences of being discriminated against, whether they were part of the LGBTQIA plus community, communities of color, low socioeconomic status. So we wrote legislation and enacted, we established a human rights commission, but also strengthened language around like a human rights law at the local level. And so when the administration changed, that got gutted. And so that is, but however, these issues, especially around discrimination and bias, have actually become even more exacerbated when you look at the climate. Right. And so that is one of many examples of in terms of kind of having leaders who don't like understand and actively take steps because of politics, right? As again, it's the political football that people find themselves in without their permission, right? Where it's just like, I'm just trying to live. And you have leaders who kind of play politics with people's lives. That's the type of stuff that like is a huge, thorn in my side, and of course the sides of many folks. So that's just one example.
I'll tell you why. It's actually a very local issue that I've been really thinking about hard, which is zoning. We have a town that has never had zoning before. And many of us have lived here for a long time, and we've been really lucky to have pretty great affordable housing comparatively to other parts of the city and the county. We've also, land has been at a, relatively, for most of us who are lucky, we're able to acquire a little bit. And so one of the things that I've been worrying about, it's also a community full of formerly farmers who had really active farms who are no longer able to have those farms. And so one of the things I've been thinking about is, I believe that we desperately need zoning to care for our land and to nurture it and for generations to come. But the other side of the story, which I'm trying more to understand, is that farmers believe that this will cause them huge economic disparity because they won't be able to sell their land. They won't be able to develop their land at premium costs. They won't be able to, et cetera, et cetera.
What they think they won't be
Well,
able to.
this is what they think they won't be able to, and I necessarily don't agree with that, but it's always this really kind of tenuous problem of, you pass these laws and they make huge effects and changes. The question is, how do you ensure that, all residents are not, are equitably served and so that's why I'm asking, I guess. I just, I worry about that. I mean, I know I'm pretty strongly, like for zoning, and I know why, but it's just that I have heard arguments about, what are some of the arguments?
It's going to impact business.
It's going to impact business.
Yeah.
It's going to, for those of us who can't afford it, it's going to, really harm our ability to sustain livelihood. And so it's this really delicate balance between being empathetic for those needs, but also realizing that you can't just live in 2020 without any protection these days because of major corporate,
It also has generated a very interesting revision of history and in terms of some of the strongest opponents of almost any governmental action tend to be families who have tended farms, as they put it, since the land was discovered. And there's a narrative of settler colonialism that is really bubbling up that I find to be,
it's really problematic.
It gets locked into these political struggles. And it's counter new residents.
And it's
I hear people of color, etc. So it's really a complex.
Or
no, I've been when I came into I was in Ithaca. Was it? I think it was like last weekend. Like the days are blurring together. I saw all the signs for like no zoning, and I was just like, "What is going on?" Because one of the we actually had a similar issue in Binghamton, in a different way. So we always cities, towns have to do their comprehensive plan, right? Where you look at issues. And so one of the things that we learned in looking at our comprehensive plan, which this was back in like 2011, it hadn't been updated in well past 10 years. It was actually longer than that. And so and I've also seen this in other countries too. So I did a fellowship with the German Marshall Memorial Fund, and one of the places I went to in Germany, in Hamburg, Germany, their infrastructure in terms of, because we're talking about thousands of years old, right? So there's this kind of clash between how do we honor our history, but then also bring things up into the current, moment with regards to kind of infrastructure needs, right? And so I hear you. I also find that with these issues, a lot of times people get stuck on the word and don't really the terms and don't quite fully understand what it means. Also, so there's kind of an awareness piece. And if something appears like it is going to it's as a potential threat, and when people don't understand how these decisions are made. And so one of the things that we did, because when we did our comprehensive plan, is that we were doing pop-up community meetings. Like our process was, it was like a year and a half, and we were going to communities and we were doing communities of interest. So whether it was like, okay, we're here in downtown Binghamton, we're going and talking to businesses, we're going to the west side and we're going to talk with landlords. Like
It
we
was
set up
small group. It was small group.
yeah, and
Yeah.
for us, we had a firm that we worked with that our comprehensive plan was called Blueprint Binghamton. And so the firm that we went with, their model we liked because they were intentional about centering the voices of residents. And so even if they had to add on another, like whether it was a town hall, whether it was a community forum, we were actively, including council members, we were going and with members of the administration and having these community conversations. And one of the I see in terms of what you've shared is people are concerned with, so what does this mean? Does this mean my ability to have like control over my property is now going to be dictated by the zoning? And it's like, well, actually, it kind of is already because, right? Because you have, site use plans, right? Which the zoning commission reviews. So essentially people are reviewing land use, right? And so, and that's where it's like, again, how do we connect the dots for folks to understand like these accountability measures, right, are already in place. So some of it's like educating folks on like, what does this actually mean? And if people feel like they haven't been given a place to fully share their concerns, like if, let's say, I don't know the firm that I can't remember the firm that you all utilized for this. Let's say they only did 2 community events during the whole planning process. Folks are going to be like, no, you didn't give enough time.
That's interesting.
Right? So that's what I'm saying from my experience in working on our comprehensive plan. I think we initially set up like, okay, we're going to do 6 or 7 meetings. And we're like, no, that's not enough. Like we were doing things, we were going and we're working with businesses. We were going to kind of residential communities where they have like groups, like neighborhood groups. We were going all over the place, working with the university, right? We were doing all these things because we know folks don't always necessarily understand like how governance works. And so some of it is also, at least for me in my conversations with folks, is like, think about the kind of the power that entity has, but also what are you ultimately looking for? Because if there's no regulation in some respect, right, somebody can come in and offer you a shiny nickel and you're thinking, oh, okay, this is going to benefit, when in fact, because there's no other kind of accountability measure, you may inadvertently create a situation for yourself that you didn't see coming, especially when you have folks who know the laws, right? And know how to spot those loopholes. And so that's where, again, it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's going to agree, because even when we passed our comprehensive plan, it wasn't unanimous. But we knew at the end of the day that we created multiple opportunities. And then when it came to council, we also did public hearings.
Right, sure.
To also give folks an opportunity to understand, because when you hear the term comprehensive plan, like if you're not involved in government in that way, like what does that actually mean? Right? So it's like, again, it's the language and helping folks to understand, okay, so what is the implication of it, and what is the potential impact, right? Because no law is perfect, right? So you're always going to have to adjust, fine tune. And so I don't know if there's concerns about some of the decision makers. I have no idea. But again, it's like, how do you help to discern, the challenges, but also help people to kind of understand the bigger picture? Because it may very well be that maybe you take a a slightly different approach where you do a specialized type of zoning. So for the agricultural folks that are just like, well, we need to make sure we have these provisions in place. Maybe there's some type of, and I'm not a city planner. I know a little bit about planning, but I don't have my degree in planning. But, you know, there are provisions that you can put in with zoning that can, again, provide even some grandfathering. Right.
That's
Yeah, that's what
basically the process.
we're
That's
doing.
basically what the approach we're taking. So,
But it is
Okay.
all about communication,
Sure,
and
yep.
and I think
It's
you know,
so interesting, but I don't like keeping our third candidate
Yeah.
in the waiting
Oh,
room.
I'm so sorry.
So, I think we need to make a plan to have Leah back another time.
yeah.
Yeah, I would love to.
I'm Tim Murray, and I was very happy to endorse you. I'm on the town board, and we're very excited to have you
Yeah.
running. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.
No, my
Thanks
pleasure.
so much.
Thank y'all.
Okay.
Sorry, Emily, I didn't mean to mess up the flow. Well, to everyone else again, and also just thank you for your support. And I definitely would love to continue, you know, having conversation and figuring out what, I mean, again, those things don't fall within the state bailiwick, you
Right.
know, but
Right.
you know, most certainly have just a little experience. So,
Thank you.
Thanks.
but y'all take care. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh my God. Send her money.
Okay. Whew. Just coming. All right. In view. Hi,
Hi,
Leslie.
Leslie.
Hi, how are
And
you?
Liz, hi.
Good.
How nice.
We'll give
to
you
see
extra
you
time
all.
because we, you know, of course, have things, you know, the first meeting started late and then the second meeting was late too. And but
No,
here-
it's how it's life in a pandemic and Zoom reality. So no problem at all, Emily.
okay.
Hi everybody. I think I know everybody. Well, I don't know who Will is.
Will,
Who is
I wasn't sure either. I'm thinking it might be Will Lawrence, but I haven't seen any
it? Okay.
explanation jump up.
Okay.
And I know if it's Will Lawrence, I know her internet is really, really, really bad. So she may not be able to make any other.
That's
appearance.
yeah. That's so true for so many people, especially in Caroline.
Yep.
Some of Caroline, not all of it.
Oh, that's right.
Some.
Yeah, I have good internet now, but that's
Yeah, I have.
Way to
we have
go,
great
Emily.
internet.
That's great. Glad to hear
Jean
it.
doesn't.
Jean doesn't.
No,
What percentage
Well,
of the population
when
doesn't
you live
have
at the
good
end of a
internet?
dirt road. Yeah.
Yeah. What percentage doesn't have good internet? Do you know?
No, not off the top of my head.
Sorry.
Maybe 20, something like that.
Jean, you're muted.
20-25%, I think.
Yeah, anybody who doesn't live on 79 or in Brookendale itself.
Yep.
Once you get outside of there, there's not much of anything.
Mhm.
I would love to take a quick minute and introduce Liz Walton, who's a member of my campaign team. And Liz only just joined my campaign a couple of days ago. So Liz, thanks very much for being here with us. I appreciate it. Okay, Emily, tell me what we.
Yeah, so the basic structure is there is no really basic structure. Because
Okay.
we've all been like totally like 1 minute time, you know, that whole thing. If you watched, did you watch the last TCDC one with the 7 candidates?
Yeah. It was
I was
crazy.
in it, but the 7.
No,
candidates.
the
Yeah, I was in
second
and
one.
3.
Second
Yeah.
one. Yes, there was like, you know, they had to get through everybody through their 1 minute before they went on to the next question to stay on schedule. And oh my God.
That's hard.
So
Yeah, that's hard.
you get like 30 minutes and you can kind of divide it up however you like. There were some guiding questions that came to you in an email. You can
Yeah.
adjust those or not. You can just wing it. You can, you know, there you go.
The complete opposite of 1 minute.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Well, listen, I have some thoughts to share and then I'll stop and I'd love to hear questions.
Great.
So I think that this was originally going to be folks from both the Caroline and the Ulysses.
I think we've got one Ulysses
Committees.
person on, Roxanne.
And it looks like we've got one Ulysses person. So that's fantastic. And I really appreciate, Emily, you putting this together. It means a whole lot to me. And I'm such a fan of hyper local action that when town Democratic committees like yours are willing to do something like this, I think it really changes the conversation. I think it's important. So congratulations to you, Emily, for doing this. So I think all of you know me, but I'll go ahead and give you a little bit more of my background in case there's info that you don't know about me, and I'm happy to answer any questions at the end. I'm Leslie Danks Burke. I'm a lawyer. I've been in law practice for about 2 decades. For the first several years, I focused on international law. I worked on litigation surrounding the World Trade Center attacks. I represented public housing residents and incarcerated people from foreign countries. I was twice honored by the New York Legal Aid Society for outstanding legal representation. I've represented women suffering abuse, incarcerated women suffering abuse. I have 25 years of legal and policy work advancing justice, like working with Central American farmers who took back their farms from corporate control in the late 1990s, and like taking on police accountability in Chicago back in the early 2000s, before very many powerful people in Chicago cared about police accountability. And I moved to Ithaca 18 years ago. Cornell drew me and my husband here. He started graduate school there. And in 2008, I saw Confederate flags springing up all over our upstate New York rural area during President Obama's first presidential campaign. And this was nearly a decade before Donald Trump started exploiting those flags and all the secessionist white supremacy that they represent. And I saw corporatization start to intersect with so-called social issues. And so I shifted my legal work. I began working with local families to deal with severe healthcare shortages, with businesses that couldn't access internet and were getting crushed by big corporate competition, farms in our region because our sustainable food and food security are deeply threatened by the corporatization of agriculture. I served on the Southern Tier Regional Economic Development Council's Ag and Infrastructure Committees. And for the first quarter of this century, we've seen wealth inequality really accelerate. And so even with this professional background, standing up for economic equality across our Southern Tier and Finger Lakes area, it became very personal for me to run for office. And the reason I run for office gets very personal. I'm a mom who simply can't stand down in the face of deep threats to the world that our children will inherit, whether we're talking about climate change or the evisceration of public education. And we are facing serious challenges. We need champions who have defended our values in the toughest environments. And I know, because I've lived it, that honesty and integrity about our values is how we move the conversation. I have a decade of experience as a public advocate, and I'm very good at building consensus and moving the conversation because I listen hard and I'm honest. For 15 years across this region, people have known, whether they're liberal or conservative, where I stand, and that I'm fighting for all of us together. I have the regional depth of experience to deliver and the tenacity to fight even where it's hard. And I believe that we need progressives who, when the more conservative Democrats from Long Island tell us that we have to moderate our views in order to win in rural areas, we need folks who have a long history of standing strong. And I know that honesty and integrity about our values is how we make that change. We need more than empty words. We need real progressive results. And when I look at the biggest threat to us right now and what we're facing, it's that families and people across the Southern Tier are getting pushed out of the middle class. We see that it is too expensive to live here. Ithaca and Tompkins County are facing that on a pretty existential level right now with significant housing crises, but we see it all across the Southern Tier. And I have a plan for how to address that. I think we need to cut our regressive property taxes in half. We can do that and pass single payer insurance. We can stop Medicaid from crushing the people it should help by making Albany pay its fair share like all other states do. So that's the first step. Let's address this huge property tax problem, which not only affects homeowners, but also affects businesses and especially affects renters because that cost gets passed on to them. We need to second end welfare for Wall Street. We have to stop unfair tax transfers to corporate developers. And I believe we should use the funds that we free up with those two projects to support real people instead. And what do I mean by that? We need to fund our public schools. We need to get the full funding for public schools. We have to build union and good paying jobs, and we have to prepare for climate change by doing the infrastructure investment that's going to bring those jobs and New York State-based wind and solar and geothermal energy. We need to end barriers in transit and housing, and we need to invest in local farms. So that's how I would address this problem of families getting pushed out of the middle class, is cut property taxes in half, end welfare for Wall Street, and take that money and use it for what it's supposed to be used for in the first place, which is support real people. I have deep experience advancing outcomes that matter to the working people of this region, and I'm not afraid to go toe-to-toe with the far right against their dangerous and dishonest attacks. But at the same time, I'm comfortable having those important conversations inside the Democratic Conference about how we hold firm on our values. And my track record is one of standing up and working hard and delivering across this region. And I'm ready to take that to the Senate floor. So thank you. And I can keep on talking because I'm in politics and they teach us this, just keep talking, or I can ask a question, answer a question.
Let's put some questions in here.
Sure, yeah.
Of course, I only have 2 monitors, so I need like a third one to pull up the,
I'll ask a question.
yeah, someone else jump in, please.
I'll ask a question. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Good. I know you talk about those lovely girls of yours often.
I do.
And I see
They're
them on
why I do
Facebook.
this.
I see them on Facebook often. I also have a daughter, and now I have a granddaughter. And
Congratulations.
thank you. I also have a son, I should say. I forget about that, but I should say that as well. But you know, what's really interesting to me is when Ashley especially was a young girl, there was always this push to make sure that she was, you know, like strong and, you know, like, yeah, I as a mom, I think I overcompensated a little bit. And now, you know, we have this joke when she comes in the house goes like this, right? But I'll tell you,
it gets bigger.
It's bigger. It gets bigger. Okay. It gets bigger. I see in our son, and I also see in a lot of young men that I teach, that they lack some of those skills of like representing themselves and being strong advocates and being go-getters in their pursuits of and maybe it's just, you know, the particular discipline that I teach in. But I'm actually really worried about the young men that I find myself in especially in daily contact with where I'm teaching. And I'm just wondering, you know, I don't hear many people talk about, I don't know, I guess I'm just wondering, you know, the question of feminism and the question of, you know, just pushing, you know, advances for young women. I think the time has come to shift the conversation a little bit. And I'm just wondering, you know, I mean, you know, your daughters are older especially, but I was just wondering if you've seen a shift in how we actually talk about specifically, you know, gender in terms of really nurturing all children, you know, all young children, all people, depending, it doesn't matter what their gender orientation is or what their preferences are, but how we really develop good citizens who have strong values, who have the ability to represent themselves, who have the ability to talk about their issues, who have the ability to, you know, find strength in who they are and who they're being. really, push forward. So, and I know New York State has a lot of programs in their education system, but I'm just wondering as a mom, because you mentioned that, and especially with 2 young children, and I know that they're not young anymore, they're older. If you've seen shifts in the way that, especially political, how politics and how the conversation around politics have changed at all.
So I'm hearing, it's really, really interesting topic, Renee, and I'm hearing a lot of questions in there. Yes, I am the mother of 2 daughters. They're 12 and 17. I'm tremendously proud of them, and I'm really excited and just sort of deeply joyful to see the people that they are growing up to be. It's truly the greatest joy in my life, is watching my children grow and advance and become the people that they're turning into. It's tremendous. I don't have a son, but I do come from a family of origin where I was the daughter, and I had 3 younger brothers. And it's not something I talk about a whole lot, because I respect my brother's privacy quite a bit. But in my family of origin, it was very clear to me that it is hard to grow up boy. And what I saw in my childhood was that one of my brothers committed suicide when he was 19, which was a very formative experience for me. It's hard for me to talk about it without my voice cracking even today.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. And that was my youngest brother, and my other 2 brothers have both struggled with significant challenges. They've each been incarcerated at different points in their lives, and so I have a real experience with exactly what you're describing, which is this pressure that I think our society puts on boys and young men. And so, what is it that we in politics can do to address that? I think it's a much bigger problem probably than a state legislator can address. I think a lot of it goes back to education.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
Yeah. And really focusing on our school system. I've seen a systematic debilitation of public education over the last 30, 40 years. I think that's one of our biggest problems in America, is that we see the evisceration of public education over time. And that is one of the fallouts of that, exactly what you're identifying. So that's one way that a state legislator can begin to address this. Another way that a state legislator can begin to address this is to be open about the conversation. When you ask, am I seeing a change since your generation? If you have a grandchild,
well, what I'm looking for, our daughter now is, heading towards 30. So the difference between
heading towards 40.
So the difference between, your kids and maybe our children, or even the time.
It's kind of a generational shift. But I think what I've really seen in my peers, so I'm a Gen Xer, and kind of my fellow Gen X parents, the ones who are parents of boys, I know that I've had real deep, passionate conversations with them about exactly what you're describing. And I know that there's a lot of literature and just kind of a movement out there around the idea that we need to make sure that our boy children are growing up with the same support system that we're at least intellectually conscious of needing to provide for our girl children.
Yeah.
And I think that it's true also for children who identify, as non-binary. Or I have 2 different close personal friends right now whose children are going through a transition of one sort or another. And I think when we put children in boxes, it creates problems for the long haul. And I think that we're learning as humans how to avoid.
Yeah, that was my point, I guess. And coming from education, you know, I think that's the shift I see. But I was just curious in politics if you'd seen similar kinds of, yeah. I don't want to take
I'm
up.
not seeing nearly as much as I'd like to see in politics. You know, politics is a smorgasbord of people of all kinds of different perspectives, and not everyone who comes into politics comes with the same progressive view that I would like to see folks advocate. So I think that politics tends to follow popular trends as opposed to set them. So I don't think we're going to see the huge advancements start in politics. I think we're going to see it start in education and in, you know, social work and in healthcare and in lots of other fields.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Leslie, I know that you've had a lot of experience with local townships, partially through your PAC. And I'd be really curious to hear, I sit on the Caroline Town Board, and I'm Tim Murray. And I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts about what you understand to be the current greatest pressures on rural townships and how Albany can address those.
Yeah, so to me, and what I hear from town and county and municipal leaders all over, the biggest pressure is the unfunded Medicaid mandate, which right now takes at least 50 cents on the dollar out of every single municipality budget across, you know, across our area, and sends it right back to Albany. It's different in different municipalities. So in Tompkins County, for example, the property tax burden takes about 33 cents on the dollar and sends it back to Albany for the Medicaid mandate. No other state in the country does this. And just to back up for folks who might not be immersed in how town budgets are set, like Tim is and like I've helped myself to become, Medicaid is a program that is designed to help people who can't acquire health insurance for themselves, right? That's the basics. And the way it works in a nutshell is the federal government pays about half and states pay the other half. New York State is the only state in the country that does not pay its own full half, but instead shoves half of its half down to municipalities. So basically all the tax dollars that municipalities take in, they have to account for sending a chunk of that back up to Albany to cover. And property taxes are very regressive, right? They hit people who have less much harder than they hit people who have more. Income taxes are less regressive. Other states do it through income tax. New York does it through property tax. So what this means is 33 cents on the dollar in Tompkins County ends up getting sent back to the state. So that means there's only 67 cents on the dollar left to pay for bridges and roads and, you know, schools and healthcare, frankly, and all the social services that got cut during the Cuomo administration, the mental health programs, pretty much anything that a county or a municipality is providing has to be done in Tompkins County on only 67 cents on the dollar. You look at a county like Chemung County, which is much, much poorer than Tompkins County, and Chemung County is sending 89 cents on the dollar back to Albany. So that is just bass backwards, right? Because Chemung County is much poorer, actually has a significantly higher population of people on Medicaid. And because they have so much less wealth and they can accrue so much less through property taxes, their Medicaid burden is even higher. So what it does is it ends up forcing municipalities that have the least farther and farther into the ground. That's not just happening on a county and municipality level, it's happening on a family by family level. And it's the huge pressure in New York State that is dictating pretty much every single thing about a town or county budget. And I think that is accelerating our terrible wealth inequality problem.
I didn't know that. I had no idea.
You want to get me going on property taxes?
Can you just say, so why is that? Why does Chemung, I mean, Cortland County must pay more too then, right?
Portland County pays more. Tompkins County actually pays about the least across upstate New York. Westchester pays less. It basically, if you have, richer houses that you can tax, then it becomes less of a burden, right? It becomes less of your overall budget as a proportion. That's how regressive taxation works. And again, I just really need to emphasize that this is not, people hear property taxes and they sometimes think, oh, well, that only matters for people who own houses. It doesn't really. I mean, it definitely impacts homeowners, but it impacts business owners tremendously. It impacts farmers hugely, and it impacts renters tremendously, because any landlord, if there's a property tax increase, is going to pass that on to their renters through increased rent costs. So when we see the tremendous acceleration in housing prices and in tenancy and rent payments in Tompkins County, you can really trace a huge chunk of that back to the property tax problem.
Amazing.
I want to, just before we end, get to Will's questions out. It is Will Lawrence, and I think her internet is bad. So she put a question in the chat. How would you support farmers? And please comment on extending broadband to the most rural areas.
You got it. Will, so working with farmers and supporting local agriculture has been a very big part of my life for the last 10 years. This property tax burden that we just described is a huge piece of it. But even more of a problem is the real lack of support that we have for processing facilities and education and training and getting generations into farming, and all the scaffolding that has to happen around farmers so that they can commit to this 30-year career that is farming. Farming's not a career. My parents are farmers. They've been farmers for 25 years in eastern Colorado. They have 1,000 acres of corn and wheat, and they farmed when I was a kid. But we didn't live on our farm. We had a farmer who farmed it for us. The guy who owned the neighboring property also farmed my parents' 1,000 acres. And then when I graduated from high school and went off to college, my parents decided they no longer wanted to live in Denver, and they wanted to move to their farm. And so they've been there for 25 years. And 25 years in farming is a pretty short amount of time, actually. For a lot of people, that's a whole career, 25 years. But my parents are just getting going, because farming is a long-term endeavor. So when you want to support farmers, you have to support agricultural initiatives that are going to last for decades. And again, what that means is addressing the massive startup costs and the tremendous property tax and other transition tax burdens on farmers, but it also means creating this scaffolding of processing facilities and getting more education and training. One of the things that I did in the early part of the 20-teens was I'm a lawyer, and I taught a wine law continuing education. As a lawyer, you have to get a certain amount of continuing education credits every year, and you can get those by teaching classes. And so I taught myself agricultural law in upstate New York, and particularly law that addresses vineyards and folks who work in the wine and grape industry. And what we would do is bring a whole bunch of lawyers from downstate up here to the Finger Lakes area, put them on buses, put a few educators on those buses who could talk for 50-minute chunks, which is a continuing education hour, and drive them from vineyard to vineyard. And in the 50-minute chunk between vineyards, they'd learn something about, how you support upstate agriculture. And then they'd get out at the next vineyard and have a wine tasting and buy some upstate cheeses and hopefully support our local economy a little bit. So, so in doing that process during the early part of the 20-teens and teaching myself agricultural law and wine law, I really became pretty knowledgeable and led these tours, I think 4 or 5 different times. And so it really is something that that's pretty near and dear to me, and that I'm very passionate about. Okay, and also internet. So internet gets into one of my other big concerns in New York State politics, and that is the deep corruption that drives policymaking in New York State. We have, over the last 10 years in upstate New York, been supposed to receive funds for last mile internet build out. Under the Cuomo administration, there never was an audit of how those funds were distributed and how productive they were. And I think the reason we never got that audit is because Governor Cuomo knew that the audit would show that the funds were not doing what they were intended to do. And that becomes real problematic. And for all of us who live in places where the internet conks out regularly, we know, viscerally that build out that was promised to upstate New Yorkers back in 2012 did not happen. So I think that the first thing that we have to do is recognize that internet is a public utility. And as a public utility, when a company is receiving tax credits or receiving state money in order to build out internet, that company has a responsibility in return. You can go be a company without a public mission. You can go do that. That's capitalism. But once you receive tax dollars or you receive some sort of benefits because you're supposedly working in the public interest, then you actually have to work in the public interest. And so these internet companies have not done that, Verizon, et cetera. And there's never been an audit of that. And my view is that we need to start with holding them accountable for the public utility function that they have and making them do what they were expected to do with the funds that we gave them. I don't know, Will, if that covered your thoughts, and I know you're stuck there with terrible internet, so you might not have even heard what I had to say, but I hope it got through to you. And you're always welcome to send me an email. Oh, thank you. Okay, so she hopefully heard it. But you can send me an email anytime. It's leslie@leslieforsenate.com. I really welcome hearing personal stories. It makes it much easier for me to do my job of advancing and advocating on this. When I was serving on the infrastructure group of the Southern Tier Regional Economic Development Council, I was very focused on broadband internet. I was working pretty closely with Clarity Connect at that point to help them get their grants through the REDC, their state funds, which they did get. But then, of course, the state took 3 years to make good on a grant that was supposed to come through in 6 months, and the whole build out problem just accelerates. So I really do believe that a huge chunk of this is making sure we hold our elected officials accountable. And so, Will, if you have personal stories that you can share with me, and then after I win this seat, make sure you're continuing to hold me accountable. I really appreciate that.
Thanks, Leslie.
Sure. And it's lovely to see Deb Halpern there too. I know Debbie and I go way back, back when I ran for in the Democratic primary for Congress back in 2012. We first met, and so it's nice to see you there too. Roxanne, did you have a question or a thought sort of from the other side of the county?
Just, you mentioned, cutting property tax in half, and that would certainly help,
Right?
rural property owners and farmers and everybody here. But that's presumably a large cut in revenue to Albany, and so I'm just wondering how you would balance that off. How does that get balanced off so that money
so
can come back to communities?
Yeah, exactly. So this is something I've been advocating and pushing for since 2016. 2016 was when I first started writing about this and pushing it out there and saying, look, we got to cut our property taxes in half, just like the rest of the country does. And there is money to pay for it. It actually, so I mean, I can just get into the weeds with this, but basically New York State's budget is about $212 billion. The property tax inflow that we'd be talking about needing to compensate is somewhere around $18 billion. These are rough numbers, okay? I can get you my spreadsheets if you want. They get pretty wonky and dense. Just by way of example, we passed an income tax increase on the highest earning New Yorkers in the middle of the pandemic. And there was a big hullabaloo from the Republicans. They said, oh my gosh, you know, they're gonna leave and we can't tax the highest wealth people, you know, and we don't have billionaires in upstate New York. These are Wall Street types who, you know, these folks have their own private health care. They don't ever go to the grocery store. They don't fly. These people are not flying first class. They're not even flying commercial, right? These are people that normal folks don't really intersect with. And a lot of them live in New York City and they don't pay taxes like the rest of us. So there was this big hullabaloo, the Republicans saying, oh my goodness, you know, if we tax them like we tax everybody else, then they'll leave. And you know, one of my thoughts was, well, what have they done for us lately? So, you know, is it really terrible if they leave? But here's the test drive that we had. We did tax them and they didn't leave. They did not leave. Because this is New York. Nobody lives in New York City because it's a low tax haven. People live in New York City because it's New York, right? And so they didn't leave. And what that has generated, just that very tiny increase that we did in 2020, 2021, is an additional $4.3 billion into the state budget. There's room there. There's room. And I think it's problematic from a fairness perspective that folks like that pay so much less in taxes than regular people do. And I also think there's an efficiency problem there. We simply cannot balance our budget if we don't tax the highest wealth earners the same way we tax everybody else. So Roxanne, when you're asking about where the money comes from, we're talking about $18 billion on a $212 billion budget. We just came up with 4.3 billion of that in the last 6 months. It's there.
Thank you.
Sure. And you know, I am wonky. I get excited about things like Excel tax spreadsheets. But to me, the blueprint of a society's values really shows up in its budget. You can talk till the cows come home about ideas and beliefs and policy values. In the end, where the rubber hits the road is whether you're paying for it, right? And so that's what I really like to get into the weeds about, is how are we going to make sure that this program that we're talking about actually hits the ground and delivers. Healthcare is another example. Healthcare has been really my passion for the last 10 years. I served on the Planned Parenthood board. I'm very interested in rural healthcare. I've been very focused on making sure that rural hospitals get funding that they need, for example, in Hornell and in Elmira. I've been a real advocate for single payer healthcare back since before the New York Health Act was called the New York Health Act. And it comes from a very personal experience with healthcare. I had a daughter who was born with significant healthcare needs, and I recognized how very fast families can get pushed out of the middle class with just one healthcare expense after another. But at the same time, you know, even with that personal experience sort of pushing me to study the problem, over the last 10, 15 years, I've really become immersed in this idea that if we can fix the healthcare problem across New York State, and the Medicaid and tax burden is a big part of that, then we can really address a lot of the other challenges that we see facing our families. And so, you know, as wonky as I get with these tax pieces, for me, it really does get back to, these are real people we're talking about with real problems. And it's not just numbers on a spreadsheet. We need to make sure the numbers work for them.
Okay, I think we caught up to, we got you your full 30 minutes, I think. Am I
Okay.
muted? Yes, we're good.
Thank you so much,
you.
Leslie.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time,
Thank you,
everybody.
thank you, thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone, for having Ulysses too. Bye-bye.
Bye, Roxanne.
Bye, Emily.
Bye.
See ya.